Dr. Siedschlag, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And
Good.
hello, everybody. So this is already the third presentation in our spring lecture series, sponsored by our Penn State Homeland Security Advisory Council, and is the first presentation by an advisory council member, because Brian is also a member of our advisory council. Thank you for his service on that important group. And it's also a special day because I understand today is the 18th birthday of the Department of Homeland Security. And Brian left the private sector to help the department stand up the new sister agency, the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency, and then he returned to the private sector. So Brian, thank you for your service on all fronts, and you're also a Marine Corps veteran. So thank you for everything, including giving back to your alma mater by making yourself available to talk to us today.
Of course, my pleasure.
Great. And while I'm going to introduce you, and it will be appropriate for everybody, for all our participants, for joining again, to briefly introduce yourself or yourselves using the chat. If you would like to go ahead and drop a sentence, and the good thing about that, it's not only a courtesy to Brian, but it will also help Brian focus his remarks, because Brian will be able to see your introduction on the chat, and then we'll have a better understanding whom is actually talking to. I mean, this is all a trusted group of Penn State Homeland Security current students, alumni, and members of our section in the Honor Society, Order of the Sword and Shield, but still it's good to know whom one is talking to, right? And Brian, just so you know, technically or procedure-wise, we leave it up to the speaker how they would like to divide their time, if they would like to be interrupted by questions or like to do a presentation, in one piece and leave so much time for Q&A. So once you have the floor, then please let us know how I'd like to proceed. And without further ado, I'd like to briefly introduce Brian. Brian Harrell currently serves as the Vice President and Chief Security Officer at Avangrid, an energy company with assets and operations in 24 states. He is responsible for the company's physical and cybersecurity, privacy, security compliance, and fire protection departments. And obviously his topic will be, you know it, because it's, it has been announced, energy security. And I believe Brian would also be able and willing to comment on the recent severe weather disaster in Texas and also elsewhere. But prior to his service as the Vice President and Chief Security Officer there at Avangrid, Brian served as the 6th Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and he was also the first Assistant Director for Infrastructure Security and Cybersecurity, for the first Assistant Director for Infrastructure Security at CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within DHS, newly established. Prior to that, among other things, Brian has held leadership roles at Duke Energy Corporation, Electricity ISAC, and North American Electric Reliability Corporation, also known as NERC, charged with protecting North America's electric grid from physical and cyber attack. He has spent time during his career in the US Marine Corps and various private sector agencies with the goal of protecting the United States from security threats. He holds a bachelor's degree from Hawaii Pacific University and a master's degree from Central Michigan University as well. Brian earned his Inter-College Master of Professional Studies in Homeland Security degree from our very own program. And like I said, he serves on the Program's Advisory Council. So among a lot of other things, Brian is also a returning alum to our university and our program. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today, and the floor is all yours. Please go ahead.
Well, all right. Well, Dr. Siedschlag, thank you very much. And thanks for Penn State for having me back. It's always a pleasure to come back and and provide some insights and maybe some nuggets of gold every now and then to this particular group. As the doctor just mentioned, I graduated from this program in 2014. And frankly, I think it's one of the better programs, if not the best program in all of academia. And I guess I could say that as a student, as an advisor, but also as an executive that is working in this particular field. The money that you're spending, the time that you are committing will go to good use. It will be used one day. Utilize the connections that you have today. And if there's one thing that I did not do a very good job of back in 2012, 13, 14, when I was going through the program, is really doing kind of the network thing as well. While this is not a security conference, these are important people and they're classmates that you're going to hopefully know and stay in contact for years forward. So definitely, get that virtual because this is presumably the future of national security in this country. So it's good to be part of the speaker program. This is, I think, important for the university. I think it's important for the program to bring in, some high quality, high caliber individuals. I'm not counting myself in that category necessarily, but to bring in some people who can provide some thought leadership. Where are we going as a country? Where are we going as a national security program? And how do we get ahead of some of the emerging threats that are out there? As you're studying, as you're putting together thesis papers, as you're trying to think about what are the emerging threats for down the road, now is the time in which to think big. I would strongly advocate that you're not thinking about yesterday's threats, but you're thinking about tomorrow. And what kind of investments are needed? What kind of infrastructure is needed? What kind of, again, legislation and thought leadership might be needed moving forward? And can you be early to the game? Can you be a plank holder when it comes to providing that leadership? A little bit about me, I'll just go real quick. The good doctor just mentioned quite a bit of it. I work at Avangrid now, and some of you might be like, well, what the hell is that? We are an umbrella company for about 10 regulated utilities throughout the country. So we own a number of utilities in the Northeast, many of them electricity, natural gas, but we also own a significant fleet of wind and solar, which I'll get to here shortly. So really kind of fancy ourselves as forward-leaning when it comes to sustainable energy. You guys probably know who I used to work for. You probably know where my politics lie. I am an all of the above kind of energy production guy. I'm not going to get on this phone call today and say one thing is the best and everything else will be damned. Where we are in this country right now, it is an all of the above approach, and I fully support that. Here as a board member, obviously, for the advisory program, but I think why I'm able to kind of speak on some of these Homeland security issues is I just came from there. And I'm seeing some of the investment, I'm seeing where the department is trying to move towards. And so please let this not be the first time and the last time that we have these discussions. Please utilize me as a resource, especially if you want to play in this particular space. There's a lot going on in the critical infrastructure and key resource arena right now. We have the administration changeover. Obviously, domestic terrorism is on the rise. Environmental activism is going very, very strong right now. It's kind of the not in my backyard group. As was alluded to earlier, we have a number of extreme weather events, and certainly there is a digital battlefield in the IT and OT space that is playing out in private industry. 85%, you've heard of this before, 85% of all critical infrastructure is owned and operated by the private sector. And so frankly, when I was at DHS, this is one of my talking points that I would utilize in a speech, and that is the cavalry is not coming. You are it. If you're looking for DHS or the FBI or the Secret Service to come on in with their cyber soldiers and save the day, it is not coming. We need to come back to homeostasis. We need to come to response and recovery ourselves with our own resources, with our own budget, with our own subject matter expertise. And so please let that be one of the things that you pull out of your back pocket tomorrow is the government, while good, they have some great intelligence capabilities. They have some good, strong indicators of compromise that we can utilize to help clean some of our systems. but trust me when I say that the cavalry is not coming. So what I mentioned just now, what sounds like a pretty full agenda. So I'm going to try and center my remarks around some of the issues of today, but also provide some insight as to what some of those emerging threats look like. Right now with the administration turnover, as you can imagine, I'm going to try and be free of politics here. But right now, the focus of the new administration is undoubtedly on climate change, infrastructure investment, and of course, domestic terrorism. My hope is that we are going to continue to hold China accountable as well. China is the most active strategic competitor for cyber espionage against the USG, against our corporations, and certainly against our allies. They do not have the intent to destroy or degrade yet, but they certainly do have the capability. I often say that China wants to steal information, whether it's proprietary or some of our trade secrets. Russia wants to embarrass us, and North Korea wants to do harm. Those are kind of the three major buckets with some of our nation-state adversaries that we see today. But going forward, I think the administration should continue to focus on filling some of the key national security positions. Obviously, Ali Mayorkas is in, the Secretary of State. There's a number of folks within the National Security Council which have been appointed and are in their spots. But there's a number of, hundreds of, undersecretaries and assistant secretaries that really provide that political leadership that keep the train moving. And that takes some time to get through the Senate, takes some time to get through the appointment process. Having done it myself, I will tell you that I was not appointed to the assistant secretary role until 2 years into the last administration. And it wasn't because there was a lack of interest. It's just, it takes a while. And at times your eye is focused on other things around you, and you just kind of never get to it until all of a sudden you're being that squeaky wheel. We need to continue to focus on COVID and COVID response as well. And right now, with the rollout of vaccines, we have an opportunity here to ensure that we're providing leadership to the American citizen. The expectation is that it's going to be free. The expectation is going to be that everyone is going to have the ability to obtain it. And with that vaccine rollout, also creates some security challenges as well. You have the logistical challenge, but you also have the security challenges associated with it. Some of these sites can, if you're not watching, if you're not anticipating, could be seen as potential protest sites, could be seen as a soft target in a crowded place site for somebody who may not necessarily share this administration's outlook on COVID, and the anti-vaccine type folks could certainly play a role here. Next would be infrastructure investment. And I say this having just driven on some of the roads recently. Right now, I am based out of Orange, Connecticut, but I'm constantly going back to the Washington, D.C. area. And inevitably, I'm constantly having to go through the New York City area. And those of you who live in that area, those of you who have traveled in that area, it is an uncomfortable ride traveling through, not just from a traffic perspective, but just, quite literally uncomfortable with the potholes and just kind of the infrastructure decay down there. And it often reminds me that we as a country, we need to make the right investments in roads and bridges, dams, and some of the main infrastructure that we utilize every single day. So that's the no-brainer. That's the obvious piece. The less obvious piece is when we talk about some of this infrastructure investment, we need to ensure that security is at the table during these conversations. There's nothing worse than trying to bolt security on in the rear. That introduces new enemy avenues of approach. That is a poor investment strategy. And so as we build new buildings, as we build new infrastructure, it needs to have cyber and physical security at the table so that we're able to keep our people safe and make the right investments and not, again, bolt things on in the rear. Next would be domestic terrorism. It's certainly on the rise. As everyone on this phone call witnessed on January 6th, whether you call it a protest, whether you call it a riot, whether you call it an insurrection, whatever the case is, there is a major portion of this country that is frankly irritated. They're mad. And they're fueled right now by disinformation. They're fueled by false narratives and some conspiracy theories. Not everyone. I'm not going to lump everyone into the same bucket here, but there is a very dangerous faction, both on the left and on the right, that are focused on sabotage. They're focused on direct action. They're focused on operationalizing their hate and their malcontent. And so, again, as we look at QAnon, as we look at Parler, as we look at some of the walkie-talkie apps that are out there, individuals are now communicating kind of behind the scenes. Where they're using certain channels to hide the things that they're saying and the plans that they are making. So from a law enforcement perspective, from a national security apparatus perspective, we need to be mindful of this. We need to be ready for it. We need to have plans in place today under blue sky conditions that would address domestic terrorism. I think right now in your face, in everyone's face, is right-wing terrorism, but we certainly see out in Portland, Oregon, for example, a number of left-wing groups out there, Antifa, the groups that are associated with All Cops Are Bastards, or ACAB, that is vandalized everywhere out there on the West Coast. And so, it's on both sides. Right now, we, within Avangrid, of course, this stays on this particular phone call and not open to the media, of course, but we have buildings in Portland, Oregon, that have been boarded up for months, well before the election. And so when it comes to some of the domestic terror groups that are out there, or activism groups, it's having a real impact on local government. It's having real impacts on business. And certainly from an electricity perspective, it's having an impact on us as well. So really the point is having key relationships now under blue sky conditions with local law enforcement partners, but also realize that whereas before, I think a lot of these groups would kind of chant, they would hold signs, they would sing songs, they would get very active in some of the court battles that you might see. But today we are really gravitating closer and closer, if not all the way in, on violence. And so right now I'm very aware of a number of organizations that have decided that we hate law enforcement or we hate corporate America. And so how are we going to get media's attention? How are we going to make our point? Well, the way we make our point is possibly, we disrupt water systems. We go out and we destroy substations or generation facilities that are going to immediately get everyone's attention because the power is going to go out, or we're going to see rolling blackouts because of whatever cause that they may have. So again, whether you're in energy, whether you're in water or other critical infrastructure space, now is the time to have relationships with your state and local partners to try and get ahead of some of these groups that are out there. Right now we're seeing a really intense focus on soft targets and crowded places. More so before COVID, but certainly in a post-COVID environment when stadiums come back online, when concert venues come online, schools are back up and running 100%. It is these facilities that don't necessarily have the strongest physical or cybersecurity protections in place that potentially can be a soft target. So if it's a mall, a stadium, a racetrack, the marathon that you might run on the weekend, or a half marathon if you're in my kind of shape. So these are the things that you really should be mindful as you are participating in shopping or going to a concert, is being mindful and having situation awareness around you with some of these soft targets that are out there. Soft targets are in fact critical infrastructure, and so they should be classified as such. Many of them are. And so I didn't want you to think and come to this presentation thinking I'd just be talking about the electric grid, but you better believe that some of the venues that I just mentioned are classified as critical infrastructure. Some of the emerging threats that are out there that I see, I'll put this in a couple buckets. Number one, it's the unmanned aerial systems, UAS or drones. I used to say that this is an emerging threat using my air quotes, but frankly, it's not emerging now, it's emerging 5 years ago. As Domino's, as Amazon, as they really want to deliver you that pizza, or Chipotle wants to deliver you that burrito to your front doorstep, drones are going to continue to be used, which is a great tool, but also with every great tool has its nefarious purposes behind it as well, right? And so, being mindful of how drones are utilized today and how are we going to protect your infrastructure from the overhead threat is going to be a key part of your response and recovery plans. So there's the counter UAS. It's how to mitigate the things that are flying above your infrastructure. I typically highlight this with a quick little story about my two boys. This was years ago. They were 8 and 10 years old, respectively, and I gave them a homework assignment. I said for $100, we're going to go out to Toys R Us when there still was a Toys R Us. We're going to go out to Toys R Us, and for $100, we're going to go out and buy a drone. And here's the homework assignment. I want you to take this drone, and I want you to pick up this 6-inch piece of PVC pipe, come to about 25 feet, and drop it. That's it. That's the homework assignment. So a couple of weeks goes by because we have school, we have baseball and things like that. And sure enough, they come back running into the house and say, Dad, come take a look. And they come to 35 feet. And with this Bluetooth and very crude claw contraption, they decide that they're going to come up and drop this 6-inch piece of PVC pipe. Now they're high-fiving and they're all smiles because they just came through for Dad. But I'm thinking, my goodness, 8 and 10 years old, about $104, they dropped a pipe bomb into a piece of infrastructure, into a water system, into a crowded stadium, into an amusement park. And instead of it being empty, maybe next time it's filled with C4, rocks, glass, nails, screws, and they would cause significant damage, not only from the blast that it would provide, but also everyone trying to exit the venue, exit the facility, trampling each other all at the same time. So that's bucket number one in the drone space. Bucket number two in the drone space, though, is number one, they're a great tool. Number two, they can also be used against us. And let me warn you now, and I know Alexander has heard me say this before, but many of you live and reside in the corporate security world, the national security space. And I will tell you that while drones are good, if you own and operate a Chinese manufactured drone today, you are potentially introducing and incurring risk. And here's the reason why. These drones potentially are seeing information leave your proprietary corporate IT system, taking your information and sending it overseas. There's very little protections when it comes to some of the Chinese manufactured drones that are out there. So what does this mean to you? I recognize that we're in open dialogue here. We're not in classified space, but I will tell you that if you own and operate them, it is something to be mindful as you go back and you understand every time you connect something to your corporate IT system, information might be leaving and it may not be going to your friend or your coworker. It could be going overseas. In terms of the next emerging threat that I see out there, it is the insider threat. For us to say, well, we do background checks every 7 years, we're good. That is an antiquated way of thinking. I am convinced that the next major infrastructure attack that happens in this country may not necessarily happen from outside of the perimeter wall. It may not happen from outside our firewall. It could happen from within. People with the institutional knowledge as to how to bring us to our knees. They understand what the crown jewels are. They understand because they have access and they have the keys to the kingdom. They're able to do significant damage from within. And so having an insider threat program today, back at the shop, back at where you reside, or in the future, is going to be worth its weight in gold. It is worth every single penny that you invest in it. And that really leads me to kind of the larger role of security today in the year 2021. And that is the idea of convergence between IT security, OT security, or SCADA, industrial control systems, and physical security. And I'll even throw another one on there, and that is emergency management. So those are the 4 disciplines that we really should be mindful of as we create a security program in the critical infrastructure space. Rarely do we see a cyber-only attack or a physical-only attack. We are seeing everything in a blended threat landscape today. And so as you build out your programs, ensure that you are not building them in silos and that everyone has situational awareness. And so when you're seeing some sort of nefarious malware that is being uploaded to your system, ensure that physical security understands. On the physical security side, if somebody is making a violent threat against somebody, make sure cybersecurity understands so that they can go back and say, okay, well, this is what this person has been looking at online on our system over the last number of weeks. He's been radicalized. He or she is looking very, very violent. He or she is going on gambling sites. They're going on pornography sites, whatever the case is, but we can start to kind of create a picture of what this person has done or potentially what they might do in the future. So again, with privacy concerns and governance as being paramount to any program, this is where we need to invest moving forward. Go back to the first part of my presentation and speech. I talked a little bit about environmental activism. Right now it's very active. It really is this not in my backyard group, and we're seeing this in the pipeline space, transmission lines, and even in wind turbines. Just about every single major grid transmission project in this country that is under construction right now, I guarantee you, because we're seeing it, I guarantee you that there is some sort of group that is anti-wind, anti-coal, anti-nuclear, anti-whatever. We don't want this, clean water turbine utilized that in our minds is a very clean way of producing energy, but in their minds it might kill this particular type of fish or this particular bird, or frankly that is a beautiful view of the mountain ridge and I do not want it spoiled by wind turbines up on the hill. Fine for somewhere else. We're all for green energy. Fine for somewhere else. I just don't want to see it in my view. And we're seeing a lot of the not in my backyard kind of mentality. And so really where this has started to transpire and materialize is in sabotage and direct actions and booby traps. In one of my previous organizations that I worked for, I actually saw as pipelines were being constructed, somebody actually laid out in wait a Vietnam era style pineapple grenade for somebody to either trip over and kill themselves or a bulldozer to run over and cause significant damage. And so, we have moved away from everyone kind of daisy chaining themselves around a very large tree and singing songs to now direct action and causing significant damage. Shifting gears just slightly, we're seeing a lot of extreme events. Right now, we're seeing 500-year floods. We're seeing, obviously, we're living through a pandemic at the moment, wildfires, ice storms, heaven forbid, one day, and I'm sure that it will come, that there's a large earthquake out west in the Pacific Northwest or in Southern California, for that matter. It will come. And let's not utilize the strategy of hope, because hope is not a strategy. We need to ensure that we are prepared now for some of these catastrophic events. I often tell people there's no such thing anymore as a black swan event. Please don't ever say, oh, that can never happen. We're seeing a lot of these things happen in real time, quite literally, as we speak. And so as we are building our plans, procedures, and relationships, again, now's the time to do that under blue sky conditions. With respect to the Texas cold weather event, I'm not going to go into a ton of detail because it is an ongoing investigation, and certainly there is a lot of politics at play here. so I'm going to try and be free of politics here. But there is an ongoing investigation by the North American Electric Reliability Corporation as well as FERC. There are 5 major utilities covering about 46,000 square miles down in Texas. And so as you can imagine with those kind of numbers, it's not a very diverse portfolio down there. So when you have major players producing the majority of electricity down there, if one has a problem, it starts to bleed the others, and all of a sudden you start seeing cascading impacts from one utility into another. In Texas, there really wasn't one single issue. I will tell you that 2 of the major nuclear plants down there, they got so cold that the plant went into safe shutdown mode. And this is actually a good thing. They are designed to not self-deconstruct. They are designed for the safety of the population around them. They're designed for, safely coming down or ramping down so that when conditions are safe again, to ramp back up. And so much of the generation that was down there actually went offline was actually due to natural gas failures. Some of the pipelines, frankly, were just freezing over. And many of you saw the pictures of some of the wind turbines with ice on them down there not spinning. However, only about 7% of the generation in Texas is wind. That's really only about 6 gigawatts of generation down there in the ERCOT area. So there was a lot of just going back and forth, trying to give wind a black eye over some of this, but in reality, it's a pretty insignificant part of the portfolio down there. The Texas grid connection is actually one of 5 major connections. You'll notice that what happened in Texas did not necessarily bleed into other parts of the country. And here's the reason why. I mentioned the 5 interconnects. It's Texas, they have their own. You have the Western interconnection, you have the Eastern interconnection, you have the Quebec interconnection, and somewhat disconnected, but I still count it anyway. You have a small little power grid up in Alaska as well. And so when people say, there's going to be a catastrophic event and you're going to see an event happen from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast because of some sort of a cyber attack, that's just not possible. It is segmented off. There's enough redundancy. We've removed enough single points of failure that's actually not feasible and not actually possible. So going forward, what do we do about it? We saw the issues. We continue to see the issues. Everyone is pointing fingers. The Texas governor has called for the resignations of all of these board members and the public utility commissions and Texas regional entity down there that does compliance. What do we do about it? Well, first, let's let the investigation play out. Number 2, winterize. Frankly, they're just not used to that kind of weather down there. Interestingly enough, the same day that Texas was going through their crisis, I was actually up in Connecticut, Vermont, and New Hampshire visiting a number of our wind farms, and snow on the ground, ice everywhere, and our blades are spinning. And here's the reason why. We have winterized equipment. We have special paint on our blades that the ice doesn't necessarily adhere to it immediately, or at least with a quick little jolt. All of the ice just falls down to the ground and we're able to spin and produce electricity. Now, I don't necessarily fault Texas for this. These are investments being made. This is how do we prudently and responsibly spend money? And so, they've never been faced with these kind of issues. But moving forward, again, this goes into no such thing as a black swan event. We need to be prepared for the worst case scenario. Going forward, especially with the results of this investigation, you better believe that they will be focused on extreme weather events in the winter, as well as extreme weather events in the summer. And last on my agenda really is the convergence between IT, OT, and physical security. And of course, I do like to mention the emergency management as well. This is a big deal. As you go back and you think about what it is that you are you're building? How do I communicate with my people? How do I ensure that I have 100% situation awareness across my organization when it comes to all threats to critical infrastructure, whether it's man-made, whether it's weather-induced, whatever the case is? We need to ensure that everyone is on the same page. And over the last 25 years, it's been, oh, that's corporate security. All they do is gates, guns, and guards. They'll do your badge if you need it. There's cyber over there. They're a bunch of nerds. They hang out in their little, locked dungeon down there, talking about firewalls and packets and malware and things like that. But in reality, today's threat landscape is so converged and hybrid that we all need to be on the same page. Lastly, and this is how I have typically ended all of my presentations and speeches when I was at DHS, and I'll do the same here. And that is, I like to advise on really just 5 areas that I want to just bring the attention of security executives to. And I think some of these have been learned on the battlefield. They've been learned in the boardroom, and frankly, as a recipient of a number of late night phone calls trying to address the monster of the moment. And number one, the threat landscape is changing. Whether it's soft targets, crowded places, the insider threats, workplace violence. Today, nation-state adversaries are seeking us, and so it's not, the Middle Eastern jihad threat from 2003 when the department first stood up. Yes, we celebrated our 18th, or they celebrated their 18th birthday today, actually, at DHS. But the threats are changing, and we should fully expect them to change. And so with the change should also be a change in budget and subject matter expertise and resources. And so we need to, in the private sector, morph and mature with the changing threat landscape as well. I guess I'm really talking about budgets. I'm talking about the emerging threats. I often tell people when I first got here, and even at DHS to a certain extent, and that is, we have a great budget for the threats from 2005. Not for the threats for 2045 and 2050. We need to think big. And I think oftentimes we get a little hamstrung. We get a little tunnel vision and focused on, again, that monster of the moment. What is coming at me right now? Where in reality, as a security executive, what we really need to do is apply some people, some thought leadership, some subject matter expertise to say, hold on, let's take a couple days. Let's take a corporate objective and think big. What are we not thinking about? What comes next? And really understand, again, that the threat landscape is changing. Number 2, understanding our gaps. It's on the folds. It's on the margins. It's not necessarily where we're looking. It's where we're not looking that the enemy is going to try and exploit. And the way I like to really demonstrate this is ask the audience a question, and that is, are you prepared to be overwhelmed? And let me say that one more time. Are you prepared to be overwhelmed? When everyone is screaming on the radio at the exact same time, when the fog of war has set in, when information is not accurate, and potentially there is blood being spilled or has spilled on the ground. Are you prepared to be overwhelmed? And if the answer is, oh my gosh, Brian, probably not, then I strongly would advocate that you have a robust exercise program. And this is why the military, this is why law enforcement, they train every single day. We do not magically get better in our time of need. We need to be prepared today. And so again, having these plans and relationships in place, and again, are you prepared to be overwhelmed? Things are crystal clear in the rear view mirror. And what we don't want to do is say, oh, wow, that was really obvious when I look, behind me at the last events of the last 2 years. Really take some time and focus on what is the threat of today, but what is also the threat of tomorrow. And really we do this, and we need to do this through risk and risk management and understanding what our risk tolerance is. And we need to defend really what matters the most. We can't defend everything. From a private sector perspective, from a corporate security perspective, we cannot defend everything with moats and alligators and castles around our crown jewels. But I often say we need to protect pencils like pencils and diamonds like diamonds. What are the most critical crown jewels that we have? Let's protect those. And then in a layered approach, a onion approach, we go outwards to try and protect those. We will never, ever minimize and remove all risk from the table. Risk will always be there. Some of it will be acceptable risk, but there will always be nation state adversaries. There will always be bad actors. There will always be domestic terrorists that, frankly, they need to be right once. We need to be right every single time. And so the name of the game isn't to remove all risk. It is to minimize risk and come back to homeostasis, come back to response and recovery and having our clients or our customers come back online as quick as we possibly can, all while saving human life. That is really the goal. Number three, and I've touched on it a couple times, and there's a bit of a theme here, and that is convergence is here to stay. IT, OT, physical security, and emergency management. As you go back, I would strongly implore you to take a look at your own org charts and say, are we organized in a way that everyone has complete situation awareness? Number four, understand risks posed by third parties. There will be some of you that say, you know what, I've dotted my I's, I've crossed my T's, I have a good compliance program, I have a good security program. But what about those that you depend on? What about the vendors that you're utilizing for critical services? Are they just as secure as you? Have you included procurement language that ensures that they must have minimum cybersecurity standards? Have you gone out and done a field trip? And I've done this many times where you take a field trip out to your vendor who says they are doing X, but in reality they're doing Y, and you are absolutely floored with your jaw wide open that they are not nearly as secure as you thought they were. And so, when it comes to that supply chain, whether it's a transformer, a laptop, or a drone, where are you getting those key services, that key infrastructure that you're going to depend on in your time of need? And number five, and lastly, I'm going to wrap this up, Doctor, I promise, and that is information sharing is critical. And some of you will say, well, no duh. We've been hearing about information sharing forever. And probably by the time I end this presentation, there'll be a new article that you can read on some website talking about information sharing. Yet, we still seem to not want to do it. And, from a private sector perspective, long gone are the days where we are apprehensive when it comes to sharing information with a competitor, sharing information with the utility that ties into our left and to our right, information sharing with our law enforcement partners. I would even be a major proponent of sharing information even with our regulators. I know, what a weird concept. But, this really speaks to collective defense, where it's not government doing it by itself. It's not the private sector doing it by itself. It's not the private citizen here in the United States doing it by themselves. We are doing collective defense. We are all in this together to try and keep our infrastructure resilient and secure. And again, we need to do this under blue sky conditions. Having a good intelligence program back at the shop is going to be critical for your success. As I often tell my staff here, I never, ever want to be surprised. And so in order to not be surprised, you really need to understand through social media monitoring, through these relationships with our law enforcement partners and our regulators, our intelligence agencies. We need to try and get ahead of this before your CEO or before your chief security officer comes asking, hey, did you see this? Or how is this impacting us? We really need to be leaning forward on a lot of these issues. And so sharing information is going to be critical. But I will give some kudos to the federal government. And again, I just left there. But the federal government is very quick to share these days. And this mindset has shifted significantly from the days of pre 9/11. But I have nothing but feathers in the cap, nothing but kudos to provide the FBI and DHS and others when it comes to their willingness to share information. But I don't know that the private sector is playing on that same open field along with them. We need to ensure that we're sharing information. Again, we are the boots on the ground. We are the ones that own the infrastructure. We will see it before anyone else does. And if we don't share it with these partners, then it's a horrible product going in, which means likely a horrible product coming back out that you are now consuming. But if I'm giving nuggets of gold, if I'm giving good information, it makes all of us that much better. And now, lastly, I promise this is the last thing I'm going to say, and that is, in closing, we need to invest in resilience. Resilience is the governance of the unknown. It is the governance of having your worst day, which might be right around the corner. It's about removing single points of failure. It's about adding redundancy to that industrial control system that is cleaning water, to that 500 kV transmission line that is coming off of a generation facility in Quebec down through Maine and into New Hampshire. We need to ensure that we do not have these large single points of failure to where if they were to fail, or if there was to be some sort of a sabotage event, that we would have hundreds of thousands of people without the critical services that they are paying for. And so with that, Doctor, happy to turn it back over to you. Happy to take any questions. I think that was a pretty high level, but I'm happy to dig into anything as you guys see fit.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. And also thank you for echoing what we try to teach as, that focus on scenario planning is a necessity, and then don't restrict scenarios to sandbox exercises, but understand it's part of, like you say, resilience building as the governance of the unexpected, and take it seriously. And then also, when as a crisis evolves, look it up in your scenario catalog. It will have been, probably addressed by someone before, and there will have been exercises where there were lessons learned that you could apply that to an unfolding crisis. And then also the need to take a step back, and what we in disaster research call this inventory phase, to do a quick analysis of the situation and do a fast-tracked risk assessments, and then risk management consideration phase before jumping to respond. So thank you for that, and that's been very useful. And it also hopefully demonstrates to you participants here that we are trying to really connect the ivory tower and the real world, and what we are trying to teach you, and the assignments that we give you. There have a few questions popped up on the chat. One is from Mark Bartholomew, who is asking, or who is interested in knowing how your company, or how do you help make your company view security as a necessity and not as a nuisance? I'd like to address that, because in the business world, it's a little different than in academia and the federal government, right?
It is. Well, what a fantastic question. And you're 100% right. I have tried to position corporate security, whether it's at Duke or really even when I was at DHS, and certainly now here at Avangrid, is we're trying to be a business enabler. I think we need to move away from this thought that used to happen in the 90s and the early 2000s, that anytime you engage with corporate security, it's because somebody was about ready to get terminated, something had just happened, or we're here to spend a bunch of money and tell you exactly what to do when it comes to cameras and access control and badging and things like that. I've made the rounds here within Avangrid as I'm engaging other chief executive officers in the organization, is how do I help you? You have this big $6 billion wind project that's about ready to come online. You're about ready to put shovels in the ground. How can I provide you a threat and vulnerability assessment to let you know what the local geography and the local threat actors are doing? What are some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that are being utilized by maybe some of these activist groups out there? But internally, inside the organization, I think everyone now recognizes that security is a significant risk to reputation. It's a significant risk to investors. And from a cybersecurity perspective, for example, we do not want to be the one person that clicks on some sort of phishing attempt, and all of a sudden we're infecting the entire system. And so what we have tried to do is really stand up a training and awareness program that is applicable all the way from all the way down to the line workers that are out in the field, restoring security every single day, and everyone in between. This is everyone's responsibility, not just corporate security. And frankly, I don't have the staff to do all of the great and wonderful things that I want. And so I have utilized the line workers as somebody who is the eyes and the ears out in the organization to see things well before we do. And so having that good relationship with the operating companies, with our human resources, with legal, with transmission and distribution and generation, whatever the case is, has really served its weight in gold, because they're able to tell us things that are happening that frankly we just would have never seen otherwise. And so, really positioning yourself as, how do I help you accomplish your job? And not just being the constant bearer of bad news as big bad corporate security.
Thanks, great. Thanks, Brian. And then Stephen Reed wanted to follow up on Mark's question with an addition to his question. And this is the question for you. Do you think regulation for security by design should be added before critical infrastructure is upgraded or added? So regulatory response. With
I have a regulator. Even when I was with DHS, I owned the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism, or CFATS program. Obviously now I am regulated 3 ways to Sunday, whether it's MTSA, CFATS, NERC, SIP, you name it. Regulation has a role. In my mind, standards for security are the minimum baseline. It is what we should all achieve to kind of get on that same page, from a common nomenclature. It's not the high bar. It is, in fact, the low bar. So what I don't want to ever see is people just doing enough to be compliant, because just because you have good compliance doesn't necessarily mean you are secure. But typically, if you have invested in the right aspects of security, typically you can be compliant. And so there's a major difference there. But one of the things that we have seen, again, that hopefully there's no media on here and this stays within the family. But one of the things that we've seen, at least in the NERC SIP space, is when it comes to regulating cybersecurity, when it comes to regulating technology, technology is moving so fast, cybersecurity is moving so fast, that by the time you have set a minimum baseline or a standard for industry to follow, it's immediately outdated. We've already moved beyond that. We're already at the cloud. We're already doing something else. It's we need to be mindful that if we do standards, yes, they're a minimum baseline, but they're flexible. They have the ability for people to say, look, that doesn't necessarily work for my business to mitigate the threat, but this over here does. And this is the way I'm going to mitigate. So it's really performance standards rather than a check in the box type of lines.
Great, thanks, Brian. Then a very good question from Jonathan Risley, who is asking, my local emergency management agency is looking at starting a drone program. Of the agencies that I know that have drones, a majority of them are, not actually manufactured in the United States. Can you, Brian, recommend a domestic-made drone company?
I will not. I'm gonna try and I'll wear the DHS hat for a second, but even now in the private space, I don't necessarily want to advocate for a particular vendor. However, there's a lot of companies out there that already own these drones. Frankly, some of the Chinese manufactured drones out there can fly circles around some of the drones that are made here domestically. There is a performance difference. And I don't want to lose sight of that. There are some great drones very affordable, and there's reasons why they're affordable. I won't go into that, but there's some great quality stuff. But just be mindful that anytime you connect to your corporate IT system, whether it's a drone, whether it's a cell phone, whether it's an iPad, whatever the case is, you are potentially introducing risk if you don't understand where your information is going. When I was at CISA, I think it was back in April of 2019-ish, we push out an alert to industry on this exact issue. And we raised the issue. We said, look, these are a concern. It is a risk. But if you already own it, here's how you mitigate it. Take the SD card out, wipe your system right after the case. Don't connect to your system, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways in which to mitigate it. So I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I need to spend a fortune on these American-made drones over here. All of these are bad. They're not great. There are risks associated with them, but those risks can be mitigated. You just need to be mindful of them.
Thanks, Brian. And we are 4 minutes out. So if you have still any questions for Brian, please put them in the chat. And I see one next question here from Carrie Miller. What techniques have you seen be most effective when addressing the black swan or no black swan belief system? So the think problem. And then second part of the question, what techniques are effective with reluctance to share information?
Great question. I think proof is in the pudding, right? I think if you asked me just a couple of years ago, I would have probably been one of the first ones to talk about these black swan events, the EMP attack on electric infrastructure, major earthquakes on some of the major fault systems, large floods that we're seeing. But the truth of the matter is, we're seeing these things in near real time. They are happening. Extreme weather events. Obviously, we're dealing with a pandemic right now. And so I think pointing to these major events have really opened people's eyes as to, okay, I understand that maybe this is a stretch, but there's no harm in being overly prepared. I'd rather be overly prepared and not utilize it than underprepared and scrambling at the last moment. And so I think today's executives are a little bit more open to this particular conversation. I also saw up on the chat, I think it was just a comment on red team. So I'll shift gears here slightly, and red team is great. And that is really speaking to having a robust exercise program. We just got done doing an exercise on pandemic planning, Department of Homeland Security, last week, actually. So I think we're an active exercise participant on the national level. Here in November, we'll participate in the North American Electric Reliability Corporation's GridX, or the Grid Security Exercise. This is the 6th iteration that happens every other year, where we will go through a physical and cybersecurity event for utilities across the country. But those are big exercises. Liberty Eclipse, NLE, Cyberstorm, those are big events. But you bring up red teaming, and this is really where it gets down to the local level, where you're putting your own people through the paces, you're testing out your own responses, you're throwing a package over your own fence, and you're seeing, does this package get picked up on camera? If it gets picked up on camera, is your security operations center, are they alerting the right people in terms of situation awareness? How is information getting from real-time event to decision makers through red teaming? And so this is incredibly important. So on the cyber side, it's penetration testing. It's trying to push the envelope and the walls of your own perimeter. But on the physical side, it's walking through workplace violence. It's walking through somebody breaching your perimeter of a very critical substation, et cetera. But this takes resources. This takes dedicated people to do this, and you have to make a concerted effort to make it happen.
Thanks, Brian. We are 1 minute out, and we have time for one last question. That is from JJ Woodrer. Brian, how do you feel about levels of government taking the easy way out and depending on public-private partnerships to resolve infrastructure issues like rebuild bridges, roads, and things like you mentioned in the beginning, the need to upgrade that infrastructure types?
Well, I think that both the private sector and the government are going to play a role here. If this is truly a priority by the government, then they need to put their money where their mouth is, and they need to provide funds to do this. At the end of the day, I represent one. When I was at Duke, I represented another. These are private companies. They are in the business of producing electricity, which ultimately makes money. If you're a investor-owned utility, ultimately they are on the stock market. They are making money for investors. Some of these big utilities are a part of your 401k. They're a part of a lot of the way in which investment happens in this country. And so to suggest that private industry should shoulder the entire burden of this is not fair. To suggest that the government should shoulder the entire burden is also not fair. This is truly a public-private partnership for the good of the American people. But as I mentioned through the scenario that I mentioned when I first got on the line here, talking about the roads, in this country, it is time for an upgrade. I think the last administration talked about it. It's up to the next administration to actually do something about it.
Thanks, Brian. So before we conclude, I definitely want to virtually at this time, present you your certificate of appreciation. I hope you're able to see it. I'll also send it via email. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for giving back.
Thank you, Doctor.
To your alma mater, and thank you for your always so active support of the program. So let's put our hands together for Brian. So that's been great. Thanks, everyone.
Sure. Thanks. And thank you, Doctor. It's always an honor to address your students, and please feel free to reach out early and often.
We will do that. Thank you so much, Brian. And before we conclude, just a reminder, next week, so next Monday, Eric Best, who also participated on in this webinar, he's Assistant Professor of Homeland Security and Public Policy at our school. Eric Best and his wife, who are also research and professional collaborators, which is great and nice. Andrea and I do the same thing, so that's nice to see like academic couples. But Eric and his wife will be presenting next week on using dogs, K9, and others for odor detection, for example, for COVID, because that's a new approach, to use odor detection trained dogs to detect COVID. So I hope you have a chance to join us again next week. Thanks again, Brian. We'll follow up. That's been excellent. Take care. Stay safe, everybody. Happy Monday night, and happy March. Take care. Be safe. And thanks, Alison, for organizing that.
Thank you. Recording's off now.